Yeah, this will look great. Photo with the editor.
Super.
Right, I'd best be off. Lots to do and all that.
We are talking about the low-budget indie horror movie, The Demonic Doll. This is a British movie directed and written by Richard Mansfield and stars Jennie Fox. The cast here is incredibly small. It's actually 2 actors and a couple of voice actors. And the budget of this movie was reportedly £1,000. That is it. But I've got to say, for such a low budget, I was actually quite impressed with this movie because you wouldn't have thought this was a very kind of low budget movie. I think it actually points to some kind of quality here of filmmaking, because I feel for such a low budget movie, they did make quite an engaging story. So what is the story here? Well, it ultimately focuses on this woman who is a single mother, and her kids are away at the father. So she's basically left there on the house on her own. And there she kind of encounters this kind of weird, this mysterious doll ultimately. And she's not lived in this house for a particularly long time, and apparently it's been kind of left there from the previous tenants, and it seems to be possessed and talking to the children ultimately as we go through some exposition. And obviously strange things that kind of happen around the house. There may be some sort of presence here. She enlists the help of the local priest, and obviously together they kind of maybe try to ultimately deal with this kind of demonic presence. So what do we think about The Demonic Doll? I've got to say, I actually quite enjoyed this movie. It's very low budget, it's very slow moving, it's very British. It's very kind of like, if you've seen kind of like these dramatisations that you have on British TV, maybe if you're not from the UK, you might not kind of know what I'm talking about, but it definitely has that feel to it. But for such a low budget, I've got to say, I thought that this was somewhat professionally made. I thought the camera work here was excellent. There's some fantastic kind of like tracking shots, and I really thought the actual cinematography and the camera work here was actually really done to a high standard for such a kind of a low budget film. So props to the kind of the filmmakers for that, first of all. Now, the movie does a wise choice here. It's a £1,000 budget, so they cannot afford to have, special effects and things like that. So they kind of don't try. But they do some kind of creepy things with a little bit of a jiggery pokery, shall we say, and kind of some quite clever kind of tricks, I would say, rather than special effects. And I think, although it's never really a jump out kind of scary movie, there is definitely a scene, feeling of unease. For example, I'll give you one scene. With this particular doll, this doll is just a normal looking doll, to be quite honest with you, was like kind of like, you feel maybe if you look at Annabelle, for example, they go way OTT in making that doll look creepy, whilst this one is more or less a kind of normal looking doll. But there's a scene where the priest is taking some photos of Jennie Fox's character for the kind of like the local parish website or something like that. And he's taken her on this iPhone. And as the woman's kind of scrolling through the photos, you basically see in every frame the doll is kind of moving closer to her. And I thought it was a very kind of like low technical trick, if that makes sense, lo-fi trick. But it was really effective and really kind of creepy. So that was really good. So I feel this movie does do a good job of creating some creepy kind of like moments where, it's never kind of gory, there's no real jump scares, but it does a good enough job here of making you feel at unease, basically. You kind of feel uneasy because, that you just get a feeling there's this presence, and it doesn't appear to be particularly forceful ultimately, but you feel it's there, which I think was quite good. Jennie Fox, I had a look at a couple of reviews, and before I did my one, and the score is low here, but I've got to say I thought it's better than maybe if you look at things like IMDb. And a couple of people have sort of said, oh, her acting wasn't very good. I didn't think it was that bad, if I'm completely honest. I thought she actually seemed quite a normal person, if I'm honest. I mean, I do have some critiques, which we'll come on to in a minute, but I didn't think the acting was bad at all, if I'm completely honest. I mean, there's only kind of two actors in this, and they're very British. And some of the kind of like the pleasantries and the kind of the politeness may seem a little weird to people who are not from the UK, but they're just very British. I mean, it's not the most amazing. I wasn't like blown away, but I certainly didn't think it was bad acting. It's just very British, very kind of like middle class British, if that makes sense. Very kind of polite and kind of like pleasantries and stuff like that that might seem trite if you're looking at this from like the States or something like that. But I didn't think the acting was that bad. What do I have some problems with? There are a couple of dream sequences in this movie, and they do not work at all. They do not work at all. They are very poorly executed, I've got to say. And, you know, this is where we have our kind of more surreal imagery, but it doesn't work to me. I thought they were actually quite poorly handled. The other thing I would say, it does fall into some typical cliches. Like, for example, the scene I've mentioned where we have this woman who's swiping through her iPad and sees this doll, kind of like every frame it's in a different place. She doesn't do anything with that, and it's just one of these things. Like, it really bugs me in horror films where someone clearly witnesses something supernatural and they just kind of go, oh man, they get a little bit, oh dear, that's really weird, and the next day they're kind of like, oh, I'll go for a jog, which I think is what happens next in the next scene. So it's just like I mean, I've said this in so many reviews now. I want a horror film to have people acting like they would in real life. I just don't know why we don't get it, but anyway. So there you go. And I've got to say, I thought the ending was a little weak. It tries to have, not exactly a twist, but it tries to do a very typical horror movie ending, and I kind of wish it didn't, if I'm honest, because it just seemed a little bit typical ultimately, and yeah, it was a little bit of a kind of a downturn. We just said, oh look, no, it's a typical kind of horror movie ending. If you watch horror movies, you know exactly what I'm saying without me having to kind of spell it out for you. But for £1,000, I was very impressed with this because I was never bored with this movie. I was never kind of like, you know, my thoughts wandering. I was enthralled in the story. Thought the acting was good enough and the characters were fleshed out enough that I was kind of interested and kind of like kept me captivated throughout. So I've got to say, I think this movie gets a little bit of an unfair rap for such a low budget film. So I'll give this movie a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.